March 19, 1996. Nelson Mandela, now President of South Africa, stands before cameras to announce his divorce. But what he says next shocks the nation. "I part from my wife with no recriminations. I embrace her with all the love and affection I have nursed for her inside and outside prison from the moment I first met her." How does a love story that inspired millions end in such pain? The answer involves not just infidelity, but kidnapping, political violence, and a woman who became unrecognizable to the man who loved her. This is the untold story of how freedom destroyed the Mandela's marriage. Before we get to the affairs, the accusations, and the betrayal, you need to understand how this love story began, because it was anything but ordinary. The year was 1957. Nelson Mandela was 39 years old, recently divorced from his first wife, Evelyn Mace, after a 14-year marriage that couldn't survive his political obsession. He was already a marked man, a lawyer by day, a revolutionary by night, organizing resistance against Apartheid's brutal regime. Then he saw her. Winnie Mandela was 21, a social worker with fire in her eyes and revolution in her heart. Their first meeting happened at a bus stop in Soweto. Nelson later admitted he was immediately captivated. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was fearless. Their first date lasted hours. Nelson bought her curry and rice from a local shop, and they discussed everything: politics, justice, and the future of South Africa. He told her honestly, "I'm a freedom fighter. I have no time for marriage, for family life. My life is the struggle." Winnie's response: "Then I'll fight with you." They married in 1958, just months after meeting. The wedding photos show a radiant couple, dressed in traditional Xhosa attire, surrounded by fellow activists who served as witnesses. But even on their wedding day, Special Branch Police were watching, taking notes, building files. Their honeymoon lasted one day. Nelson was immediately called back to political work, a treason trial that would consume the next 5 years of his life. This pattern would define their marriage: passion interrupted by politics, love interrupted by the law, intimacy interrupted by imprisonment. Winnie gave birth to their first daughter, Zenani, in 1959. Their second daughter, Zindziswa, arrived in 1960. Between those births, the Sharpeville massacre happened. 69 unarmed protesters were shot dead by police. South Africa exploded. The government banned the ANC. Nelson went underground. For months, Winnie barely saw her husband. He would appear at night, whisper with comrades in their home, then vanish before dawn. The police raided their house repeatedly, terrifying the children, searching for evidence, for weapons, for Nelson himself. Winnie was learning a harsh truth. She wasn't just married to a man. She was married to a movement. August 5, 1962. Nelson Mandela was driving along a rural road in Natal, disguised as a chauffeur, when police vehicles suddenly surrounded him. He'd been betrayed, though exactly how remains debated to this day. Some say the CIA tipped off South African authorities. Others point to internal informants. What's certain is this: Nelson Mandela's life as a free man was over. Winnie was 26 years old, with 2 daughters under 3 years old, when her husband was sentenced first to 5 years, then, in the infamous Rivonia trial of 1964, to life imprisonment. The judge declared that Mandela and his co-accused had planned to overthrow the government through violence, and that only mercy prevented death sentences. Nelson was shipped to Robben Island, a maximum security prison on a desolate rock in the Atlantic Ocean. Winnie was left alone. Here's what most people don't understand about those 27 years. Winnie didn't just wait. She couldn't afford to. The apartheid government made her a target. She was fired from her social work job, banned from attending gatherings, restricted from leaving Johannesburg. Police would arrest her without warning, hold her for months without trial, and interrogate her brutally. In 1969, she spent 491 days in solitary confinement, 17 months alone in a cell, psychological torture designed to break her spirit. They stripped her naked during interrogations. They threatened her children. They wanted her to betray her husband and his comrades. She refused. When Winnie emerged from prison, something had changed. She was harder, angrier, more radical. While Nelson wrote letters from Robben Island preaching patience and negotiation, Winnie was in the streets, leading protests, confronting police with a defiance that made her both a hero and a liability. The people started calling her the Mother of the Nation. International media called her the Black Pimpernel, a rebel who appeared at protests and vanished before police could catch her. However, a darker side was also emerging. In the 1980s, Winnie formed what she called a football club for young men in Soweto. But everyone knew it wasn't really about sports. The Mandela United Football Club became her personal security force, young, angry men who protected her, yes, but also enforced her will through intimidation and violence. Neighbors started whispering. People started disappearing. In 1990, Nelson Mandela walked free. Imagine that moment, 27 years imprisoned, finally released, cameras everywhere, the world watching. And beside him, Winnie, older now, harder, a woman transformed by struggle and trauma. In the early months of Nelson's freedom, they tried to reconnect. But within a year, everything fell apart. Letters emerged. Love letters between Winnie and Dalian Mpofu, a young lawyer 30 years her junior who had been part of her legal defense team. The affair had apparently begun shortly before or just after Nelson's release. The letters were intimate, passionate, and undeniable. One reportedly read, "I'm missing you like mad. You are a diamond, rare and special." Nelson discovered the affair through the media. Newspapers gleefully published excerpts. Can you imagine the humiliation? The man who had sacrificed everything, who had endured decades in prison while his wife became a symbol of resistance, now had to read about her infidelity in the morning papers. But here's the truth that makes this even more complex. Nelson didn't blame her entirely. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, what those 27 years had cost her. The isolation, the police brutality, the impossible burden of being both mother and revolutionary. In his more generous moments, he acknowledged that he had been absent, that she had suffered in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving. And trust, once shattered, is nearly impossible to rebuild. By 1992, Nelson and Winnie were living separately. He moved out of their Soweto home. She refused to move out of the official presidential residence when he became president in 1994. The separation was awkward, painful, and very public. Nelson tried to be diplomatic. In interviews, he spoke carefully about Winnie, praising her sacrifices while avoiding discussion of their personal troubles. But privately, friends said he was heartbroken, not just by the affair, but by what Winnie had become. In 1991, Winnie was convicted of kidnapping and being an accessory to assault in the Stompie Saipai case. Her sentence was reduced on appeal, but the conviction stood. Nelson Mandela, now the face of reconciliation and justice, was married to a woman with a criminal record for violence against a child. It was untenable. On March 19, 1996, President Nelson Mandela stood before Parliament and made a personal statement, something virtually unprecedented. "I have decided to end my marriage to Winnie Mandela. I am not and will not be at fault in this matter. But the time has come for me to move forward with my life." He continued with those famous words about embracing her with love, but also made clear he was initiating the divorce. He was ending it. The proceedings were handled quietly but quickly. By April 1996, they were officially divorced. Nelson agreed to a generous settlement, homes, financial support. He never spoke publicly in anger about Winnie. Even in pain, he maintained his dignity. But one detail from the divorce revealed the depth of his hurt. When asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation, Nelson's lawyer simply answered, "None whatsoever." Neither Nelson nor Winnie remarried immediately. For Nelson, there was still a country to heal, a legacy to build. He threw himself into his presidency, into AIDS advocacy, into building schools and promoting peace. Then, on his 80th birthday in 1998, something beautiful happened. Nelson Mandela married Graça Machel, the widow of Mozambique's former president. She was 52, an activist and humanitarian in her own right, a woman who had also lost a spouse to the struggle for African liberation. Their wedding was small, intimate, and joyful. The contrast with his previous marriages was striking. With Graça there was no drama, no police raids, no prison visits, no affairs. Just companionship, mutual respect, and peace. Mandela once said of Graça, "She makes me bloom like a flower." After decades of sacrifice and suffering, he had finally found uncomplicated happiness. Winnie remained in politics, serving in Parliament and maintaining her status as a controversial figure, beloved by some, reviled by others. She never apologized for her actions during the struggle years, never expressed regret about the violence associated with her. Some saw this as a strength, others saw it as a delusion. When Nelson Mandela died in December 2013, Winnie was there, along with Graça. Photos from the funeral show them side by side, the two women who had loved the same man, bound together by grief and history. Winnie herself died in 2018 at age 81. Her funeral drew thousands, testimony to her enduring significance in South African history, despite the controversies. So what actually ended the Mandela's marriage? Was it the affair with Dali Mpofu? The violence of the 1980s? The 27 years of separation? The answer is all of it and none of it. Their marriage was destroyed by apartheid itself, by a system so brutal that it didn't just imprison bodies, it imprisoned relationships, it imprisoned possibility. Nelson lost 27 years of his life. Winnie lost herself in the struggle. Both paid enormous prices. Both were traumatized in ways that made a normal partnership impossible. The affair was a symptom, not the cause. The violence was a symptom. The distance was a symptom. The real killer of their marriage was a racist regime that decided love between two black South Africans was less important than maintaining white supremacy. Nelson Mandela once wrote from prison, "I have often wondered whether any kind of commitment can ever be sufficient excuse for abandoning a young and inexperienced woman in a pitiless desert." He knew what the struggle had cost Winnie. He knew what his imprisonment had done to their marriage. And still, in the end, he couldn't forgive what she had become. Their story isn't a simple tale of betrayal. It's a tragedy about the human cost of resistance, about how fighting monsters can sometimes transform you into something you never intended to be. The Mandela's marriage couldn't survive freedom because, by the time freedom came, they were no longer the people who had fallen in love at that bus stop in 1957. Sometimes the price of liberation is everything, including love. What do you think? Could their marriage have survived if Nelson had been freed earlier, or was the damage already done? Let us know in the comments below.